Good revenue is the revenue that pays off for your business in the short and long term. The converse is bad revenue. The work that it takes to support bad revenue is never worth it.
Welcome to the Founders Forum. I'm Blake Tengberg, a transactions attorney at Foley and Lardner. Well, we're really pleased to have Neeta Bidwai, founder and CEO of DFN Strategy and host of the Good Revenue podcast, on with us today. Neeta, how you doing?
I'm great, Blake. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining. Well, for those who don't know, please tell us a little bit about DFN and the core mission that drives your company.
Sure. We're a pricing consultancy. So we really focus on helping customers validate and understand what customers value. And everything else we do falls from there.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start DFN? What kind of gap did you see in the market that you aim to fill?
Sure. So I've been out in tech for, almost a decade now, which has been amazing. I'm really attracted to the innovation. I like the iconoclasts. I enjoy mission-driven companies, and I'm very much wired that way. So the pain point that we try to solve is one around validating customer value. And it's a mouthful, but it's a really important concept. And that's because particularly with tech companies, and I find it with startups in general, we fall in love with the problem we want to solve, sometimes also with the customer we want to serve. But there is often a delta between what we're building or how we're solving a problem and what customers actually care the most about. I measure that dedication and that care on the part of the customer as value or as willingness to pay. And that's where it comes full circle back to pricing, that we're really, really focused on understanding what are the things that Blake cares about. Because if we were selling you something, even our own services, it might be the 73rd priority on your list. It's not that it's not important. It's not that it's not valuable. It might not be valuable enough to you. And so that's something that we really spend a lot of time on, is trying to understand this from a perspective of segments. So not just one Blake or one Neeta, but Blake as a representative of a segment of Blakes is more valuable to any business trying to grow.
That's incredible. Now, do you primarily work with customers when you're validating their segments, right? Do you work with them on a one-off basis, or are you kind of an ongoing advisor? What does that look like?
It depends, but generally, I think that this is an ongoing process. And anyone who has built an early company, or even if you've come into a mature company, there are problems that are going to crop up over time. Like, we all know this. And I think that question of staying really close to the customer and validating what they care the most about now is always important. So I think this is an ongoing thing, whether you work with someone like us or you do this work yourself. The other way to kind of think about this too is that even in the best companies, even if you're an Apple or some other like legendary company, the market is going to change. Customer expectations are going to change. And your competitors are also not just, hanging out unhopefully. Maybe we wish they would, but these are smart people that we're competing against too. Or it may be that a category is evolving, and so in that case, the competitive alternatives might have changed. As in the case of maybe like BlackBerry versus the iPhone. I recently watched that BlackBerry movie, and I think it is a fascinating take on what happens when you as a company don't adapt, and especially if you're the market leader, what some of those vulnerabilities are that a competitor can take advantage of. So I think when it comes to pricing and like really understanding what your best customer segments care about, I think you should keep a close eye on that and build that into your ongoing process and strategy.
That's incredible. Well, you mentioned something about pricing, and there's something on your website that kind of caught my eye when I was perusing your website. It says, you state that, if I have it correctly, good revenue is worth more than bad revenue. What does that mean? Tell me about that.
Yeah, this is another real topic of passion. It's also the name of our podcast because I believe in this concept so much. Good revenue is the revenue that pays off for your business in the short and long term. And the converse is bad revenue, which is sometimes they are the deals or the customers that we take because, again, these are real businesses we're running. We might have revenue pressures. We might have an overly optimistic sense that that someone, Blake might be a good customer. I'm kind of banking on it, even though I might have a spidey sense that you're not really the perfect fit for us. Mm-hmm. And so what we have found, and what I've found in my own experience, is that the work that it takes to support bad revenue is never worth it. it looks like it in the short run. And if you have an aggressive board or, again, something else is going on in the business, I absolutely understand the appeal of it. But what I really encourage companies to think about is what is actually driving your good revenue. So again, these are the customers that care about what you do best. These are, if you're getting like feature requests or something else from your customer base, it's in line with where your roadmap and vision is. It's not taking you off course. And then also it's something where it's happening at a price point and it's making sense for your business model, because that's another thing. I have been in several different startups in my career and in some larger corporations. And one thing I have consistently seen is that if you take bad revenue, especially if it is a large, prominent customer paying you a lot of money, it's very easy to cannibalize your own resources and roadmap in support of whatever that customer wants. Mm-hmm. And in the short run, you think, hey, I'm just going to build this widget, or we're just going to make this change, et cetera. What happens is it slowly but surely changes the direction of the boat. And before you know it, you're heading for a different island than the one you were trying to reach. So that's why I really think good revenue is a concept that can really help people if you think about it as a North Star.
Yeah. So it's really kind of maintaining what is the core value that you originally came up with when you started your product, and really maintaining that vision throughout the customer process. No founder, no entrepreneur, no business owner likes to hear that their baby is ugly, right? That whatever product that they've got is lacking something, or is missing something, or is not perfect. How do you approach that with founders, right? I mean, a lot of founders and entrepreneurs like to hear that what they're doing is the best way. Now, obviously, you're kind of coming in and saying, we may need to refactor your approach. We may need to refactor your pricing, your customer experience. How is that? I mean, is that a difficult process? Do you kind of more or less find that people are willing to have those conversations?
Well, it's such an interesting question, because I think this is part of our segmentation too. I think the companies that are a good fit for this have an inkling all the way up to a real self-awareness that something isn't working. And one of the common pattern matching criteria I find in our own segmentation is often things used to be working well, but they're not now. And people are curious as to why. So that's kind of how I look at it. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It's really hard. And I, having, started this company and working on our own offerings over the span of the last few years, like I've gone through this too. I have kind of, we've really productized what we do. And I've had the same conversations with, oh, I love this little thing, but the market is telling me that this is not a big enough problem at the price that our potential customers would want to pay. And so I had to do some of that work myself. So I do relate to it. Yeah. And it's always easier from someone from the outside to come in and say this to you, right? Like I could be like, oh, hey, Blake, here's a whole list of things you're like not doing well. You could do better. It's the easiest job in the world. The harder thing is to internalize it. And to your point, to make those changes, because you're emotionally invested. You have put tons of time and effort and probably money into it. So I totally get that. But I think the kernel of change is knowing that you have a problem. Like that self-awareness, I think, can be really helpful with this kind of work. And I think the best entrepreneurs get that, because you can be really passionate about a problem, but you can also see that many of these like high performing companies have pivoted in their histories, right? And I can think of no example of anyone who's just gone like straight line up the whole time. It's usually more like down and up. But what you want to see and what you see in the best companies is the trajectory is up and to the right. Yeah, that's what I think we're going for.
Well, here at Foley, we work with a lot of startups, founders. What advice would you give them? What piece of advice would you give them of those particular businesses looking to navigate the complexity of B2B or SaaS sales? What, kind of taking what you've learned at this point, what kind of piece of advice would you give them right now?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to really fall in love with the problem from the perspective of your customers. And this is another thing that I think is hard, and it's a little bit nuanced. I have felt, and I've fallen into this myself as well, but there's a real difference between what I perceive the problem to be and what the customer says. And this actually ties back to what you asked in the preceding question, which is when you're going in to tell someone, hey, you might be wrong, or you might want to consider these other options. That's generally how we talk about it. The reason that someone would believe us or listen or want to make change is because their customers, the people you are trying to solve for and serve, that's who you're really listening to. It doesn't matter what Neeta thinks. I can have, opinions about this all day long. But in our process, we're talking to hundreds of your customers and we're synthesizing this data. You should hopefully be doing this yourself too. And so I think at the end of the day, like to the extent that you really know what the customers want and you are willing to take in the fact that there are places and times where what the customer says isn't what you hope or wish or even think is true. You might have a lot of conviction. It's a popular word in the startup ecosystem these days. But I think your conviction needs to match up with what customers care the most about.
That's awesome. Well, it's a very needed business model. So I love what you're doing. Your podcast is phenomenal. So thank you for doing everything that you're doing. For those that are interested in learning more about you or engaging with your services, what's going to be the best way for them to get started?
Yeah, you can find us at DFN, our website, or if you're interested in kind of learning more about how we see the world and some of the resources we've put together, the Good Revenue podcast started as a labor of love, and now we've just dropped our 30th episode. So I'm becoming a real podcaster somehow through this process. But I'm reachable by email, so feel free to ping me. And if you have even questions that we can help answer, happy to do it. I really love this topic. And one thing I have enjoyed is just kind of talking with founders and even company executives at like larger BUs we've done some work with too. But if you've got a tricky problem that you're trying to solve, it might be interesting to think about whether or not this pricing, market, product fit is part of the problem. And so feel free to reach out.
Well, Thea, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Such a pleasure, Blake. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep innovating.